Thank you, Sam, and I want to welcome everybody to today's session. It seems like on a regular basis, it's easy to hear something in the news about the SCRA, and if you frequent Google News or any of these, there seems to be more and more. There are bills that are introduced in the states or federal government. There are banks that come back and say, we erred here. We're going to talk about one of those in a little bit towards the end of today's program as far as an enforcement action. We've got several that were in the news recently in the last few years because of enforcement actions. And these are generally large dollars. And that's why it gets the media's attention, because it's a true reputational risk issue as you look at what did you do to this poor service member. And I don't mean to sound flippant about it. There are times that I will see something about this person's a veteran or they were a service member, and in one case it was a guy who was 72 years old, and he was in the news for something, but he's a 72-year-old veteran. Well, even if he did 20 years in the service, he's been retired for quite a long time. And in many cases, it's people like me who did 3 years and got out, essentially. So I'm a veteran. There are certain things that I'm entitled to, and being called a veteran is one of them, but it's not like I expect a lot of special protections. However, the SCRA does provide special protections for those people who are currently in the service or roughly have been in the service in the last year or so. As far as debts, foreclosures, and we're going to go over those things today, because some protections extend while they're in the service, some protections extend for a year after the service, some protections apply to the service member, some apply to the service member and family, some apply to the service member and their business. There's a lot of work involved in SCRA compliance. That's where banks are having problems. For many, many years, the SCRA was, it's one of those things that kicks in once in a great while, and it's not a big deal. We don't have that many customers. Many banks will sit back and say, we've never had an SCRA account. Well, in some cases, you may have had it and you simply didn't know it, you didn't recognize it, and in that instance, that's what we're going to talk about today is procedures, things that have to be done in advance and in preparation for what happens when that notice comes in, because it's kind of like disaster recovery in some respects. If you try and do it at the last minute when you need it, it's a little bit late, and you're not going to be prepared. So today we're going to talk about, and I guess at the outset, the slides are pretty brief. It's the materials, which are actually 51 pages of the materials booklet itself. That's what you should really have in front of you. The slides are going to help you kind of keep place, and in the upper right-hand corner of the slides, I've got some references to page numbers, and I think one of them got thrown off by a page break that somehow appeared in my document, but it's only one page, and so it shouldn't be a big hindrance. But we're going to talk about today what SCRA is about, where it came from, and why we have it, because if you understand that, you can better understand the spirit and the intent. And when your bank has to comply with certain rules, understanding the reputational risk side of it, the spirit and the intent, may help guide you towards when you are asked to opine, can we do this, can we do that with this particular loan. Sometimes when I talk about lessons learned, it was kind of a big deal. One of the banks we'll talk about said, we're going to make things simple. When a customer notifies us, we're going to reach out to all of our accounts that person has. We're going to go out to our credit cards and to our mortgage loans and to all these departments, and we're going to code all their accounts as SCRA applicable. And I'm thinking, well, duh. Now, I came from a community bank. It made a lot of sense when the person said, hey, I'm covered by the SCRA, to look for all the possible accounts. So when we get back to some procedures that I would recommend for institutions, we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about protections, a little bit about when they apply and who they apply to. You've also got a cheat sheet towards the end of your booklet that's going to have some information on that. There are some notices. Some banks There's a HUD notice that has to go out, and some banks will say, well, we don't have that many SCRA customers, or we don't have any. Well, you don't know what you have, and that notice required by HUD actually says it should go out to all your mortgage customers because you don't know who it's going to go to. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Willful blindness, simply where some institutions, some lenders, not necessarily banks, but they want to turn a blind eye to it and say, well, this won't count for us. Well, I'm going to show you why it will count. That's where we're going to look at some case reviews. I've got several legal cases. I've got some pretty good fact-based situations, some narratives in there. So we'll see how we're doing this time. We might have to go over those fairly quickly, but we'll hit certainly at least the highlights. There's some non-discrimination requirements similar to what you would have under Regulation B. Somebody wants to impose their rights and remedies under the SCRA just like they would under equal housing laws, as an example. You can't then discriminate against them for that. The bank has to make sure that it's like, these are the rules that are applied, and that's what we're going to work off of. Auditing has to be done, and at the outset, I will say, and I'll probably reiterate this when we get back to it, but the GAO did a report, and essentially they looked at what regulatory agencies were doing, and they said, the examiners are going out, and they're looking at SCRA, but not in all the cases. And when they go out, they're asking the bank which files are SCRA applicable, and those are the ones that they're looking at. And so the GAO kind of hammered them and said, that's not how it should be going. They need to go out and they need to test other files to see if those are actually SCRA. So is the bank actually getting all of their files right? Does the bank have strong policies and procedures to identify these? Or did the bank, for whatever reason, say, oh, you asked for SCRA protection, but we're going to deny it, here's why? Are the examiners looking at those? And it was right after that we had a big enforcement action that came out. I think the two were probably synchronized in the first place. But in any case, the GAO has put a little bit of pressure on bank examiners. We've had the bank examiners, the regulatory agencies, put out some more information on SCRA and assisting people with PCS orders as an example. So if it wasn't a big deal in your last exam, I think you probably can expect that it's going to be a bigger deal on your next exam. It's one of those things that I think is going to be a little bit more prominent. So even if, hey, we don't have any, you need to be prepared to say, here's how we know we don't. Have we received any requests that we denied SCRA protections to? Are we verifying military status on our customers before we do any foreclosures or repossessions? Those are going to be some questions that you're going to need to be able to answer. If you're looking in your materials or on the screen, you're on slide 3 on the screen and page 2 in the materials. When we talk about the law or the regulation, there is no implementing regulation for the Service Member Civil Relief Act. It's USC 501. And you might want to make this note if it's one of those laws that you want to look up and you're not totally familiar with where it's at. The BOL alphabet soup, if you're on the BOL page, which I don't have open in front of me right now, but on the left-hand side, it's like the second or third item down in the blue column is going to be alphabet soup. And you scroll down after you get through all the CFPB's regulations and fair credit reporting and the banking regulations that the Fed and the FDIC still have. One of them is the Service Member Civil Relief Act. That's where you'll find the law itself. And again, there is no regulation. There has been some regulatory guidance that your examiners have put out. They've put out audit work papers. They've put out, again, a paper document recently dealing with what banks need to do when their military customers are going to PCS, which is a permanent change of station. Essentially, they're going to move from one place to another. That happens less now than it used to be. As an example, when I was a military brat and in the service, about every 1 to 3 years you moved. And so it was pretty prominent, and it happens more during the summertime, the period that we're in right now, just exiting out of. But with all the transfers overseas to the war effort, the movement of families has decreased. but the service member himself or herself is still going to be PCSing. Now, in the absence of regulatory requirements of a regulation, essentially you have to work off of what other banks are doing. What's the industry best practice, and what have the courts come out and said we have to do? So those are some of the things that we're going to look at today as well. We'll talk about some of these issues when we get to the resources, as well as looking at the court cases that would influence this. There are some additional related laws. I've already mentioned the HUD mortgage letter. We're going to go into that.